that are important to us coming up is going to be our service of friendship and sort of initiating the first Wednesday of December. I believe that's the 4th. Is that on our calendar for our time together with our friends down the road at Nagani Mitchell UMC, right? That's coming up. Is that the 4th or the 5th? The 4th, yes, sorry. The 4th of December. So please plan on joining us for that, because we are going to have a meal. We are going to have fellowship, so that's an important meal for us. And then we're going to celebrate sort of that kicking off of Advent together. Of course, we'll have already had our first Sunday of Advent, but friends, we're friends and neighbors, right? We have a relationship with one another, so why not gather together, not as whoever signs outside, but as brothers and sisters in Christ who anticipate the arrival of Jesus again in our lives. And we'll celebrate with some prayer, and we'll celebrate with some music, and we'll just celebrate that we are in this together. Also, December 15th is our combined service, and we'll be having it at 10 o'clock, so we'll meet in the middle, and we'll have our 9 o'clock friends and our 11 o'clock friends together, and we'll have, again, a worship service as we celebrate the good things of the arrival of Jesus in our midst. And I think even the kids and a couple other things, are some special surprises for us there in that service. So please, afterwards, we are going to be having a brunch. See what I did there? I celebrated 2 opportunities for us to gather that are outside our normalcy, right? And then there's food at both of them, right? So that's how we do things. We try to change it up, reward you with food for trying it out. And then also, please know that this Tuesday, I don't know why I put up 2, but this Tuesday is, we're going to be handing out the fruit Thanksgiving baskets and some of our shut-ins, or some of our people that are alone, and those kind of things this year, or have recently went through a circumstance of their health. And so there's some women that are gathered together, I think, that have prepared them. However, we had someone that passed this week, and so there's a funeral on Tuesday, and so we're not going to be giving those out in the fellowship hall. I say this because, friends, some of our women that are on that team that help with fellowship dinners after a funeral are the ones that we're going to be helping pass these out. So what I'm saying is we need some help on Tuesday. If you'd be willing to drop a few of these off, they're all local, and they can get the directions for you. But in the messy church room where the kids gather, that's where all the fruit baskets will be. So if you have some time on Tuesday, we gather together at 10 o'clock. If you would go in the side door where the parking lot is, head right to the messy church room. I know everyone would be so thankful for your participation to help maybe carry 2 or 3 of those around town to drop those off. Not only will it bless the volunteers so they're not freaking out, but it'll also bless those who receive those things. It's an intentional way for us to say we see you, we love you.
We have one additional opportunity to celebrate the season on Monday after the 15th, the 16th. We'll be singing and playing bells at Teal Lake Estates. Please come and join us. They love hearing Christmas music, and we love being there.
What time you got, David?
6:15.
6:15 over at Teal Lake Estates, right on 41, before you get to the light in Nagani there. We have a gathering together, right, that the bells will be playing, so there's going to be a time of Christmas caroling with some bells. So please join us the Monday after our combined service on the 16th. We'll probably have that in the bulletin, but just to mark it, kind of on your calendars. Would you agree that things get busy this time of year, so we got to be intentional about putting those things on our calendar? Yes, Melissa. No. Sorry.
Oh, I said it wrong.
Teal Lake Assisted Living. Yeah. You can always count on your spouse to correct you. No, I appreciate that. No, to understand that, yes, no, it is Teal Lake Assisted Living. So please see David or mark that on your calendars, because when we have that opportunity to gather together, it's important when we show up to support that opportunity. Okay, all right. So we're moving along now, and if you remember, if you were here last week or if you were not, we celebrated Christ the King Sunday, which is actually this Sunday. Remember, I flipped it over because we're having Thanksgiving this week, so we thought we'd talk about the great Thanksgiving. But to understand, before we get to that scripture today, again, I just want to draw our attention to the calendar, because it's so important that we remember our calendar as Christians, the Christian theological calendar, doesn't always match up to our paper calendar that we flip or we have in our phones. This Sunday, right now, this is the last service of our theological Christian calendar year. And so this is when we would traditionally celebrate Christ being the King of our lives, so we understand what we're anticipating. We understand why there's a season of waiting in Advent that would start off our Christian New Year. So I wanted you to think about that, for all of us gathered together, that as we walk through this Sunday and last week, the next time we gather together will be the first Sunday of Advent, the first Sunday of waiting, the first Sunday of anticipating the arrival of Christ. Why is there such a long anticipation? Because Christ is coming again. And Christ, when Christ comes again, won't be meek and mild, won't be the servant. He will be the King of Kings, the roaring and conquering lion, and he will call his church to him. He will not be crucified and rise again. He will come victorious in all the splendor of heaven, and he will call those who love him to his side. Talk about I can only imagine. We wait for that. We remember that Christ came to us as a true gift from God, but understand that we're also walking through Advent, anticipating Christ's arrival again. This is our last Sunday to say, we know Christ, we remember Christ, and now we wait intentionally. But he comes again. And to make sure that there's room in the inn of our hearts, right? The inn, there's no room in the inn of our hearts and our lives. That we ask the question of ourselves, is there room in our lives for Christ? Is there room in our lives, space? And I wonder what would happen if Christ arrived at our home. Would we give him the spare room that we would give so many others? Or would we give him the king-size bed? Would we open up the freezer and take out that cut of meat that is saved for special occasions? Because of our honored guest. That means we would give Christ the best space, not the space in the corner that's left over. We wouldn't take out the microwavable mac and cheese, even though I enjoy that. We would bring out the best of what we have, because Jesus has poured out everything for us. As we celebrate this last week, I wanted us to take a look at the Great Thanksgiving. We're talking about capital letters here, not the one that shows up on the Peanuts cartoon, and not the one that shows up on Thanksgiving Day and this Thursday, but the Great Thanksgiving. The Great Thanksgiving that came before all of giving thanks. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 to 26. And this is Paul writing to the church at Corinth. Verse 23, Paul says to the church, "For I have received from the Lord what I also pass on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks for it, he broke it and said these words, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" Verse 25, "And in the same way, after the supper was over, Jesus took the cup and said this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." And finally, in verse 26, "For whenever you eat this bread and drink of this cup, you will proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Now, some of you might notice that we don't have a communion table up here today. We're not taking communion. But we wanted to go back there in that moment when we're celebrating, right, the last Sunday before our Christian New Year begins, before the anticipation, the waiting, the falling and awaiting the arrival of Christ. Because here is Paul reminding us, as he reminded the church in the original context here, is that we need to appreciate the Great Thanksgiving. And I didn't want to have communion here because I didn't want it to be sort of that nice everything together, because communion is messy. And not because sometimes the juice gets spilt or sometimes there's crumbs, but why was communion offered to us in the first place? Because Jesus was about to get beaten, betrayed, and killed. That there did not need to be grace and mercy poured out from the cross. There was no need for forgiveness if we didn't sin against God. The whole forgiveness, the whole grace and mercy, the whole love of the cross, the bread and the cup, forgiveness is messy stuff. I often think of our military, and I have a friend who is a Marine, and just understand he happens to be a Marine. I'm not judging or putting anybody in order, but there's a white glove test that I would never have passed anywhere in my life or anything. I wouldn't have cut it. And I was talking with him before he was about to get married, and he wanted to be in his service colors. And he said, should I wear my gloves? And I said, well, why wouldn't you wear your gloves? He said, because people are going to want to shake my hand, and we're going to be touching things, and I have a feeling I'm going to get them dirty. And it sort of drilled into my head that somebody might drop and have me give push-ups or get my toothbrush out if they get dirty. And I said, I think you should wear them, because it will remind everyone that you come with holy, pure hands and the covenant that you're about to make. And also, at the same time, you can always take them off when you're shaking hands if you'd like to. And I said, are this your only pair? He said, no, I have more. And I think to myself, just throw them out. But it was interesting that he was so worried about, should he keep his gloves pure as to not disappoint. And friends, I think when we gather together at the table, whether some of us gather together here for communion, or here, or here, or here, sometimes you have a gluten-free option over here, however we've gathered for communion at Wesley United Methodist Church, I didn't want us to do it today, not because we shouldn't, but because I want you to anticipate. I don't want there to be that immediate payoff, that immediate response. I want you to anticipate having communion, to have it sit amongst our hearts for a week, have it stir within us as we remember the great Thanksgiving, and come expectant, and come wanting, and come desperate for the meal of cup, and the juice and the bread, to come expectant next week. Paul said for us this, for I have received from the Lord what I also pass on to you. Friends, it's so important when we think about not only Scripture, but the call for us to celebrate the great Thanksgiving, the Eucharist, the communion table, that we pass on the story, we pass on the true biography, we pass on the promise that was passed to us. None of us would be able to receive communion if none of us told the story, explained to us what we are doing. I would not be here. You would not be here. The generations would not be here. The generation that is my daughter's age would not know why we gathered together for Bread Day, as she calls it, unless we told the story often and over again. Because I heard it from those that came before me, and they heard it from those who came before them. And Paul is saying, I heard it from the disciples who were there. The early church, it was passed on to me what Jesus said, and I am passing it to you. That these things are important because they were passed down from Jesus and the early church to those first students of his lordship. On the night he was betrayed, we take a look at these opportunities for gathering together. There's some things to keep in mind when we go over the communion story, but some of us it still might be a little confusing. It might not get as much attention because Communion Sunday isn't always about communion. But before it became something new, it was something old and faithful. You see, Jesus took 2 of the 5 main ingredients of the Passover meal, Old Testament stuff. Nearly the entirety of the Old Testament covers the Passover meal. Because way back in Exodus, we look at when Jesus delivered the Israelites, the chosen people of God. So for most of the Old Testament, we understand that the Passover meal was the high holy celebration. We would gather together, we would pack the house. Think of our Easter service or our Christmas Eve service. It was more packed than that. You had to reserve seats. You had to camp out. You had to fill up and open up all these things, and there were people even clamoring to get inside. Could you imagine that? High holy day of Passover. So Jesus had been very familiar with the Passover meal, which included 5 ingredients. And these ingredients were, 1, that there was a lamb. There was a lamb that was the best of your flock, that was spotless and unblemished, and you would welcome this lamb into your home, similar to how we would a dog or a cat, or if you're not one of those people, just imagine what it's like when you have a family pet around you. And just when you started to get used to it, just when you started to talk its language, just when you started to pet it and enjoy it, it would start to know you and trust you. Somebody would do this, and you'd have to clean it up, and you'd have to roast it. What do you think that did for the young people, even if they knew it was coming? Just when you started to make a relationship and start to love this animal, it was taken from you. But it wasn't taken from you from a bad place. It was taken to provide you a means to be closer to God. Jesus would take that element of the lamb and say, I would be killed for you as you learn to love me. He would allow himself to go because then he would be the instrument. The blemishless, sinless lamb, no sin, would be the way to draw you closer to God. Secondly, there would be unleavened bread, so there would be this matzah bread, this thin flat bread that would symbolize the urgency. That there was such an urgency of God's people to follow God's command, to be rescued by God, that there wasn't time for yeast to rise in the bread, so it was very flat. And it was also to represent poverty. Right? When Christ arrived in our world, it was in such a poor, impoverished state. They're arriving that in the manger scene. You know, we have the animals that are there. Jesus arrived in such a way, in time and fashion, that he would be above none of us. It reminds us of the urgency and also the poverty, because you know what would happen if you couldn't afford a full loaf of bread? You would get the leftovers. This reminds us that we were obedient to God, even when it was inconvenient, as soon as he calls upon us. Jesus would take this as well and remind us that he was above none of us at that table, for he even served his betrayer. And later on we would know that he would wash our feet. Jesus came to serve us, so that in that servanthood would see the glory of God. We see the third ingredient would be the 4 cups of wine. And it would symbolize 4 promises that were made in Exodus, the original church. There would be 4 promises there of deliverance. And I would invite you to check that out in chapter 6. But briefly, it looks like that they would bring you out from under the influence of Egypt, so it would create that, this is how you learn how to live, and remove that influence. And secondly, the second promise is that you would be delivered from freedom, so you would no longer be slaves. The third would be that I would teach you how to become my people, that I would teach you, that I would judge you, but I would redeem you and draw you close to me. And finally, the last one is that I would be your God, and Israelites would be my people. See, they had to be taken out of the rulership, the slavery of Egypt and influence there, to fully become washed clean of that influence, and then become God's chosen people. And Jesus chose to keep the cup of suffering that said, you will become my people. And Jesus said in that covenant, the cup would then become that moment when I say, you will be my people still. We will be joined together through my blood. And all those things that came before will come arrival in this cup. That in this time, sin will cover you. And you will be brothers and sisters in the inheritance of eternal and everlasting life. And my grace falls upon you as you learn to be my people. Then we have the bitter herbs, and we see them mashed together, because the bitter herbs that would come, there would be a variety of things that would make it just truly disgusting. If you've ever had a Seder or Passover meal, is it's not that good at all. It will cause you to have that in your mouth, that kind of thing. You don't like it. But it's supposed to be bitter. It's supposed to remind us of what slavery does for us. It's supposed to remind us of this dark time. It's sort of when the lights would get laid low and remind us this is the very depth of desperation of God's chosen people. But then it would also be mixed with several fruits and herbs, and like an apple cinnamon type of gathering mixture together. And so that would remind us that life is full of joy and exalting and peace. And there is also sometimes bitterness and loss, and it's molded together, and it sort of makes a bit of an interesting goop. And sometimes that points us to the brick and mortar that was used by the slaves by Egypt to continue to build their empire on earth. But Jesus would take the bread and the juice, and he would say this: once he had given thanks for the meager meal that was brought there, the unleavened bread, he said, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Don't do it because it's tasty. Don't do it because it's the first Sunday of the month and it's just what we do. Come today in remembrance of me. Remember that I took your place, and it was urgent. You know, Jesus had to teach the disciples tonight, because if he waited for the bread to rise, it would be too late. This was his last evening meal with the disciples, and he said, this time in urgency, my life is about to be over. Everything is about to change, so I have to leave you with this one thing that you must not forget. So as often as you tell this story, do so remembering me. And in the same way, Jesus took the second of the 5 ingredients for the Passover when he made it his own meal for a new beginning and said, "This cup is the cup of the new covenant. This is my blood. Do this whenever you drink it, remembering me." Don't just rinse your mouth out. Don't just dip it in the cup so you can see it change the bread color here in our church when we do it by intention. We want you to see and recognize that when that cup touches your lips, when you take that bread that is soaked in the juice representing God's covenant and blood through Jesus, that you receive again that grace and forgiveness that is poured upon us undeserved, and we have walked and kicked and stomped on the name of Christ, whether intentionally or unintentionally, throughout the whole time until we take it again. But this time, we remember that Jesus said, "I have another pair of white gloves for you. I have another opportunity to make you pure. Throw the other ones out, and I will give you new holy hands." For whenever you eat of this bread and drink of this cup, will you do so remembering me? Friends, I'm going to ask the praise team to come up. And as the praise team is coming up, I want us to anticipate communion. I want us to remember the table that will be set for most of us. I don't want to assume. I know we still have some people that will not be at the table for a variety of reasons. But a great many of us will be around some table. It might be a different table, like I said the first time. It might be a different arrangement. It might be at a different house, different place, with different people, with people that isn't quite as full as it used to be. Friends, can we remember when we gather together as people and we break bread to give thanks for it? That we are provided for provision. If you're missing someone that you love, and it seems that that shadow of that loss gathers over your table, can you thank God as we wipe away the tears that they meant something to us? That sorrow comes from a place of saying, "Hallelujah, God, you gave us someone so vital and important and appreciated in our lives that our heart aches until we can meet again." We sang together, "Trade our sorrow for joy." Did you sing that? Did you believe it? Would you be willing to trade your sorrow for joy? Not happiness, but joy in saying this is not the end if there's an empty chair. Or what happens if there's someone new there? It can get awkward, right? We don't know what to say or to do or our traditions. Can we trade that for a joy of saying, "Lord, thank you for making this table full. Thank you for putting people in our lives in relationship because there's an opportunity to get to know someone different from us and maybe to even learn something from them." Friends, if you're alone in this Thanksgiving, because there is brokenness in the family or too far to travel, or whatever the circumstance that brings you alone, Thanksgiving this Thursday, we should honor Christ amongst them. But the great Thanksgiving is between you and Christ. Remember, the capital Thanksgiving is not this Thursday on our calendar, it's the one with Jesus. So we don't need to have the tapestries of the Thanksgiving Thursday that we have here. If you find yourselves, you're not missing out on life because you too have been redeemed by the blood of Christ. So can you trade that for a joy in knowing that yes, you might be alone for whatever reason in your home, but you don't have to feel isolated because Jesus was alone and was thinking about us. As often as we remember Jesus, He did these things for us.